Welcome to part 6b in the Rapture and Wrath Ready or Not video series. In the previous episode, we identified the woman clothed with the sun as the nation of Israel, travailing in her 2,000-year struggle to give birth to the promised seed, Jesus Christ. In this episode, I'll explain the powerful symbolism of the great red dragon. John's detailed depiction provides us with crucial insight relating to Satan's wicked strategy and his evil plot to destroy the people of God and usurp the throne of planet Earth. The apostle sees another wonder in heaven. This second sign was not of a woman clothed with the sun. Rather, it was of a great red dragon. The woman had the moon under her feet. The dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman had a crown of 12 stars upon her head. The dragon had 7 crowns on his 7 heads. As the woman is all about righteousness and ultimate triumph, the great red dragon is all about wickedness and ultimately his own defeat. It's a serious miscalculation to laugh, scorn, or dismiss the depiction of a great red dragon as foolishness, or see its inclusion as simply the product of a vivid imagination. There are obvious challenges in seeking to understand the book of Revelation with its many symbols and figures of speech. But behind the dramatic imagery of this epic narrative of Scripture, there is literal truth. The 7 heads of the dragon represent 7 powerful kingdoms that arose throughout history. They have no relationship to the 7 hills of Rome, as is sometimes suggested. These 7 heads of the dragon had one preeminent goal: the annihilation or assimilation of the woman clothed with the sun. Why should it be thought otherwise? Satan knew that the seed to which the woman would one day give birth would crush his head. The identity of the 7 heads or kingdoms of the dragon can be identified. The first head of the dragon was Egypt. Now, initially, the Jews prospered down in Egypt during the life of Joseph. In time, however, they were enslaved, and the command was given that all Hebrew male children were to be slain at birth. This would quickly lead to Israel's extinction. Only the action of the midwives, who did not obey Pharaoh's command, prevented this from occurring. A later Pharaoh planned to slaughter the Jewish people and amassed his chariots against them. On that occasion, God intervened by parting the Red Sea, allowing the Jews to escape. The second head of the dragon was Assyria. In 722 BC, the notoriously ruthless army of the Assyrians came from the east and defeated the 10 northern tribes of Israel, which had at an earlier time separated themselves from the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Now, it was characteristic of the Assyrians to chain prisoners together and place hooks in their jaws and tongues as they marched them back to Assyria. If the captured prisoners didn't keep up, a pull on the chain could rip the tongue out or tear away part of the jaw. Some years later, in an attempt to defeat the southern tribes of Israel, the Assyrian king Sennacherib surrounded the walls of Jerusalem and King Hezekiah after marching through Judea and plundering the towns and villages in his path. On the night before the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, an angel of the Lord miraculously descended upon Sennacherib's army camped outside the city gates, killing 185,000 Assyrian soldiers while they slept. The third head of the dragon was Babylon. 3 times in a 20-year period, the Babylonian army sacked Jerusalem in 606 BC, 598 BC, and 586 BC. On the final occasion, they destroyed the Jewish temple on Mount Moriah, put an end to the sacrificial system, and plucked out the eyes of Zedekiah, the last king in the Davidic lineage, to reign. But only after he was forced to watch the murder of his 2 sons. After 70 years of captivity, a small and feeble remnant of the people returned to Jerusalem under the leadership of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. The fourth head of the dragon was Medo-Persia. In 536 BC, the Medo-Persians defeated the Babylonians and became the dominant world power. The book of Esther records a decree sent out by the Persian king announcing that all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire were to be slain on a specific day. Only intervention by Mordecai and Queen Esther, who was a secret Jewess, prevented the annihilation of her people. The fifth head of the dragon was Greece. In 336 BC, at the age of 23, Alexander the Great crossed the Aegean Sea from Macedonia into Asia Minor. With a small, well-trained army and brilliant tactics, Alexander defeated the dramatically larger Persian army. Over the next 12 years, he continued his military campaign and pushed all the way into India in the east and south to Egypt and North Africa, capturing everything in his path. Through the introduction of the Greek language, culture, and pagan gods, as recommended by his teacher Aristotle, he assimilated his conquered lands into the Greek Empire. History, however, records that Alexander befriended the Jewish nation and did not attack or harm Jerusalem, and he died at the age of 33. But following his death, and after much political intrigue and conflict, 4 of his generals divided up what was now the massive Grecian Empire. In 168 BC, the army of one of Alexander's Grecian Empire successors, who ruled Syria and Asia Minor, marched into Jerusalem. He desecrated the rebuilt temple on Mount Zion by sacrificing a pig on the altar, placing a statue of his pagan god Zeus in the Holy of Holies, and demanded that the Jews worship him. He forbade the Jews the right to practice circumcision, observe the Sabbath, or adhere to the Mosaic law. It was an attempt to assimilate the Jews into his kingdom by adopting the idolatrous Hellenistic or Greek religion. Many Jews refused to acquiesce and became martyrs. The nation's existence hung in the balance. Only a heroic uprising led by Mattathias Maccabee and his 5 sons, which would last for 3 years, drove the invaders from the land, permitted the cleansing and rededication of the temple, and the restoration of the priesthood. The Jews established a holiday to commemorate the event and called it Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication. The 6th head of the dragon was Rome. During the 2nd century BC, Rome began its ascendancy as one of the world's superpowers. Rome united much of the civilized world through her military might, rule of law, brilliant road system, and Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. But Rome was intolerant and ruthless toward nations that would not submit to her. In AD 66, a small group of Jews complained because of religious persecution at Caesarea Maritima, the major Roman stronghold along the seacoast of Israel. A legion was sent from Rome to quell what had now become a disturbance. War between Rome and Israel broke out and lasted for 4 years. And in AD 70, with 3 legions, the Romans finally broke through the city walls of Jerusalem and then the walls leading into the temple compound. The temple was looted and set on fire. The large amount of gold that adorned the temple melted and ran down the massive Herodian stones. The soldiers, in a frenzy to get at the gold, literally dismantled the massive stones one by one, fulfilling Christ's prophecy spoken 40 years earlier that not one stone would remain upon another. During the 4-year conflict, tens of thousands of Jews were killed, and many more men, women, and children were taken to Rome as slaves. Many were forced to build the Colosseum, probably with funds from the artifacts taken from the temple. Evidence of the Roman conquest of the temple in Jerusalem can still be seen to this day in the carved relief on the Arch of Titus in Rome near the Colosseum. Thousands more Jews fled to other countries and the islands of the sea. And almost 1,000 men fought on for 3 more years from a mountain fortress in the Judean wilderness called Masada. In AD 73, when they could no longer hold off the Roman soldiers, the defenders agreed among themselves to die by self-inflicted wounds. Thus began the worldwide diaspora, or dispersion of the Jewish people that would last almost 1,900 years. During those centuries, the Jews were persecuted wherever they went. It was as if there was a sign over the earth that read, "No Jews wanted." This period of worldwide dispersion was graphically described by Moses. "And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. In the morning thou shalt say, Would God it were even. And at even thou shalt say, Would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see." The sixth head, or kingdom, as already noted, was Rome. But in between the sixth kingdom, Rome, and the eighth kingdom, that of the Antichrist, there must be a seventh kingdom. However, the seventh head of this great dragon mentioned in Revelation is far more difficult to identify than the first six. Biblical scholars have debated the identity of the beast's seventh head for centuries. Some have speculated that Germany fits the description. Germany was a highly advanced moral nation with a strong Christian influence that could be traced to the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther. But in the early part of the century, Christian so-called higher criticism or theological liberalism, which started in Germany, began making inroads, and the great historic doctrines of the Christian faith were rejected. This liberalism created a spiritual vacuum in the hearts of many of the German people. By the early 1930s, a man came to power that would plunge the world into the Second World War. Adolf Hitler wanted to rule the earth and populate it with a super race. The mentally ill, deformed gypsies, and especially the Jews, were all targets of the Third Reich. When the war ended in 1945, 6 million of the estimated 15.5 million Jews of the world were murdered for no other reason than they were Jews. Others have sought to identify the seventh head of the dragon as the Ottoman Turkish Empire. The Ottomans ruled the Middle East from 1517 to 1917. Their empire was one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in history. At the height of its power, this sprawling empire controlled territory that extended from the borders of Austria in Central Europe to the Horn of Africa. From east to west, it spanned a vast region extending from the Persian Gulf to the western regions of North Africa. Most importantly, it controlled Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Still others identify the seventh head of the dragon as the historic Islamic Caliphate. Shortly after the death of Muhammad, a series of militant Islamic caliphs, or Muslim military leaders, rose to power. One after the other, they conquered and colonized vast swaths of territory across the Middle East by the sword and in the name of Allah. They each led their Islamic armies to loot their way through towns and cities from Syria to Egypt and as far east as Persia, crushing all who stood in their way. They sought to erase the cultures, religions, and symbols in these conquered lands by enforcing total submission to Islam. During their reign of pirating and terror, much of Christendom was completely destroyed within a short span of years. In AD 636, with their sights set on the ultimate prize, these marauders moved south after ravaging the Christian communities in Syria to besiege Jerusalem. In this wave of Islamic conquest, they cut off supplies and took the city by starving the inhabitants, and Jerusalem fell to the Muslims after a 4-month siege in AD 637. According to some historians, when Umar, the conquering Muslim caliph, entered Jerusalem and saw that no church had yet been built on the ruins of the Temple Mount, he took advantage of the situation and ordered the construction of an Islamic mosque on the site of Israel's second Jewish temple. In the year AD 691, it was completed. Through the years, many changes and updates have been made to the structure, but it still stands today as an Islamic shrine known as the Dome of the Rock. In John's description of the dragon, he noted that there were 7 crowns on the 7 heads of the dragon. As the 7 heads depict the 7 empires, the 7 crowns on their heads depict kings who rule over those empires. The identification of specific rulers associated with these kingdoms seems clear in some cases, and yet in others is more difficult to determine. Here is a list of what I believe to be plausible identifications of these historic kings. The Pharaoh of Egypt, which knew not Joseph, who wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, was most likely the first crown. The king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, who took the 10 northern tribes into captivity, or his grandson Sennacherib, who laid siege on Jerusalem, may have been the second crown. The king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the temple, ended the priesthood, and took the Jews into captivity, was the third crown. The prime minister of Persia, Haman, who tricked the Persian king into sending out a decree to have all the Jews in the empire killed, was the fourth crown. The king of Syria, part of the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who ruthlessly murdered many Jews and attempted to outlaw the practice of Judaism in his effort to assimilate the Jewish people into the Greek culture and idolatry, was the fifth crown. The emperor of Rome, Vespasian, or his son, General Titus, who destroyed the temple and took thousands of Jews back to Rome as slaves, may have been the sixth crown. As previously noted, the identification of the seventh head of the beast has been debated among Bible scholars for centuries. Obviously, the leader of the Seventh Empire is inseparably linked to the identification of the empire itself. Without the certainty of that knowledge, we can only speculate at this time as to the identity of the seventh crown. In summary then, the 7 crowns upon the 7 heads of the dragon depict 7 kings and their associated kingdoms. Each has been empowered by Satan through history for 2 primary purposes: to either assimilate God's chosen people through intermarriage with pagan nations so they would cease to be an identifiable people group on the earth, or to utterly destroy the Jews, thereby wiping them from the face of the earth forever. This is the strategy of Satan. But God is sovereign and all-powerful. His promise to preserve His covenant people and His plan for the ultimate redemption of the earth will triumph. Thank you for watching. In the next episode of this series, Part 6C, we'll complete our study of the symbolic significance of John's powerful vision in Revelation 12. The woman, Israel, is about to give birth after a long and painful time of travail. But the great red dragon stands ready to devour her offspring and bring about her tragic demise.
Go deeper in your understanding of God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. Zion's Fire magazine is an exceptional resource with powerful insights from Scripture that provide a clear understanding of God's ultimate plan for the last days and the return of Jesus Christ. As a first-time subscriber, you'll receive a free 1-year subscription to Zion's Fire magazine with no strings attached. Request your free subscription by visiting our website or by calling our toll-free number, and we'll send you 6 free issues, 1 every other month, for a full year. We depend on the generosity of viewers like you to support the ongoing production of these programs. Your donation, whether large or small, is greatly appreciated. Donations may be given online at www.zionshope.org or by calling us toll-free at 1-888-781-9466. Stay informed and see the latest from Zion's Hope by liking us on Facebook, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Twitter.